Welcome back, Euro students. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're going to pick up where we left off in class on Tuesday. As you guys remember, today we did a writing workshop, but I want to continue on with the French Revolution just because we're under the gun. Just a reminder, you don't have to tell your friends this, but those of you who are loyal to not the French Revolution, but to KO European history, there will be a quiz on the material in this SIGcast. So just a heads up. If you don't want to tell them just because you want to do better than them, I totally get it. For period 5 and the rest of you, some of you guys went over this in class. This is where we left off in period 5. So I'm going to kind of pick up right here in the notes. So for some of you, this is a review. Don't worry about it. Now, if you remember, we in detail went over the difference between the Assembly, the Legislative Assembly, and then now the National Convention, how the National Convention was intimidated by the Sans-Culottes as well as the Paris Commune. We mentioned the September massacres, and so we're going to pick up where we left off, and in this, we're going to talk about the Revolutionary Army. And a kind of funny thing happened was they started to win some battles and against the coalition. And the Prussians were stopped at the indecisive Battle of Valmy on September 20th, 1792. And why I say indecisive, I just mean it wasn't like this great big victory, an overwhelming victory for France. But remember, they have control over the propaganda machine. So it's a great moral victory for the National Convention. And it whips up people's sense of nationalism and pride in what they're doing. And we see this today with athletes, but it's us against the world, and that's kind of what feeling and sentiment overcame much of France. So they had a couple victories. They had a major victory as well, and it was the Battle of Jemmapes. And again, I'm probably botching that pronunciation, so I apologize, but that was really the first major victory for France, and what it resulted in was the occupation of the entire Austrian Netherlands by November of 1792. So not only were they defending their borders, they were actually taking some of their enemies' territories. So again, if you can imagine the support and the nationalism that this whipped up. Okay, so by February of 1793, the National Convention goes ahead, and they're feeling good about themselves. They're trying to get more nationalistic fervor. So they declare, I mean, again, it's very, very crazy of them, but they declare war on Britain, Holland, and Spain, in addition to the war that's already going on with Austria and Prussia with that first coalition. So, basically, if you're wondering, like, why would they do such a thing? What are they doing with this nationalism? Guys, what they're trying to do is basically, as we talked about in class with the political left and political right, they're trying to make sure that there is no possible way that the right, the conservatives, the monarchs, or the Girondins, who are the moderates, are going to, any way, shape, or form, change what they're doing. They are making sure that they're going to establish a republic. And as we've been talking about, they are going to execute Louis XVI. He was tried and convicted of treason and executed summarily in January of 1793. So again, that's what we're saying here. Those who voted for this now had to preserve the government because there was no turning back. If anything happened, if the royalists came back, if the old regime came back, they were sure to lose their lives. And so they had to make sure that everybody was all in. And so we got some stuff that we're going to go over here, but here's live footage. It's kind of disturbing looking at all the people, and unfortunately, this becomes very, very, very common in France moving forward. So by 1793, May of 1793, the Mountain, as we talked about, the more radical faction of the Jacobins, had support by the Sans-Culottes. They ousted the Girondins from power. They didn't want any moderates. If you were moderate, you were weak. If you were either with the radicals or you were against them, and it became more and more that there was no in between. The Mountain really did suspect that the Girondins would ally with conservatives and royalists to retain power and kind of lose their luster for this revolution. If you remember, the Girondins were okay with a constitutional monarchy. You also had the enragés, or if you look at that word, the base of it is like enrage. They were the radical working leaders of Paris. They were even more radical in some cases than the radicals. They were every bit as radical, if not more, than the Sans-Culottes. But they seize and arrest 31 Girondist members of the National Convention, and so they basically get rid rid of all opposition to the mountain, and the mountain is free to do whatever they want. So we basically have this situation here where they're eliminating all voices of not reason, but any voice of opposition. And it's tunnel vision. They're going one way and one way only. And should be noted that they're going there fast. Okay? So the revolutionary government had finally lost the confidence of a lot of people in France. Okay? You understand that people aren't normally in tune with doing things like this. And thinking that's okay. Remember, I know it's easy to kind of look at the French a little bit in a different light because of all this crazy stuff we're talking about, but remember, they're being ruled by a few and still in this point. So what we have here is a situation where a lot of people are taking a step backwards and losing confidence. They're like, what are we doing? Are we nuts? We just declared war on Britain, Holland, Spain. We just killed a king. Oh my God, what is happening? And so many of the Girondins, the moderates, they leave. They leave Paris, and they start to work against the revolution. They still want change, but they just don't like the direction it's going. In fact, an example of this is Charlotte Corday. And some of you guys that were here on Friday, we watched this in part of the movie, but Marat was in his bathtub taking his medicinal bath, and Charlotte Corday knocked on the door, and Marat had an open door policy. She had made claims that she had a list of people that were conspiring against the revolution, so he agreed to see her. She walked in and just stabbed him, killed him in the bathtub. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect that Charlotte Corday wanted. He becomes a martyr in death. But, again, why do you need to know her? First of all, she's a female. We've talked about the influence of women on the French Revolution. But the other thing is, the fact that people were really, really concerned about the direction that France was going in this case. And I'm going to show you a picture here of Jacques-Louis David painted the death of Marat here in the bathtub, again being assassinated by Girondin Charlotte Corday. This is an example of neoclassical painting. So again, we'll talk about David a little bit later. So in retaliation, the Jacobins went Jacobin on the women and started shutting down all of their political clubs, salon type places where they would meet. Okay, then we get into kind of a scary thing here. Anytime rulers start throwing the emergency card around that, oh, we have to rule because there's a crisis, and you submit to this committee or you submit to this group. It happens in Germany later, you'll see. It's a scary thing. But by the summer of 1793, there's this thing called the Committee of Public Safety. And it did. It became an emergency government to deal with the internal and the external challenges of the revolution to make sure that the Republicans, and in this case the Mountain, were victorious. They were led by the infamous Maximilien Robespierre. We've been talking about him. And, again, we've mentioned this is the age of Rousseau. So he was heavily influenced by the ideas of Rousseau and, that notion of general will. And he fanatically supported revolutionary idealism. Even probably more fanatic than him was Louis Saint-Just, who was also a major leader, kind of Robespierre's boy on the committee. He had made kind of a name for himself in the army when he successfully drove the Allied coalition out of France. He came back and he was kind of a George Washington type. They nominated him to be the president of this national convention. And like I said, he was more idealistic than even Robespierre. He believed in a perfect state. And again, to get to that perfect state, if you had to kill people, go Machiavelli. Does the end justify the means? Let nothing stand in your way. So that's really kind of the philosophy that became the embodiment of the Committee of Public Safety. Some of the examples, and again, I know some of you, we talked about this, but they came up with a law of Maxim. They started taking control over everything because they knew what was best for the rest of France. Basically, the law of Maximum was a planned committee that planned the economy to respond to some of the food shortages and a lot of the economic problems brought about by the instability internally, but also the war. They allowed France to wage total war against its external enemies. Anything they needed, they were able to take care of. They started to control maximum allowable prices. They started using fixed currency, fixed paper assignats for key products. So you have price controls here. They've fixed the price of bread at levels that the poor could afford. So you can imagine the poor were okay with that. And they started to ration. They rationed different types of food, different types of bread, and made sure that in some cases it was shared fairly. The government also nationalized many small workshops. They took over people's businesses, requisitioned raw materials and grain from the peasants, and they started beefing up their arms and munitions production for the war effort. So in effect, this is basically a total war. This is what we mean by it. It's going to be kind of the blueprint later on for our Civil War. It's going to be a blueprint for what countries do for enduring the First World War and in the Second World War, for that matter. But the other thing is, I want you to know that in effect, it really is. It's a form of early socialism where the government's controlling all of these things. Okay. You also have something that interestingly happens. Slavery is abolished in all of the French colonies, including Santo Domingo and Haiti, and we'll talk about that with Napoleon here in a little bit. So, again, backing up some of the revolutionary, enlightened ideals, going ahead and ridding their country of slavery was a big step forward for them in terms of their revolutionary ideals. Now, you have a military victory. Lazare Carnot reorganized the French army and established something called the Levée en masse, and you need to know that. Basically, the entire nation was conscripted or drafted into service as war was defined as a national mission. Again, general will. The size of the army grew to 1 million men. It was unprecedented in the history of European warfare, and as I said, it changes everything. And by 1794, July of 1794, the Austrian Netherlands and the Rhineland were once again controlled by France. So in many cases, they were going back to where it was during the heyday of Louis XIV as being a world power. The first coalition that was formed in retaliation to what was going on in France started to break apart, started to fall apart. And that planned economy that I had talked about. The planned economy made mobilization of all of their forces effective. This is one of the reasons why the military started to have such success. And as I said, nationalism. Don't underestimate how big nationalism was here. It was a strong force in uniting the French people. All right. And then again, the victories led to a little bit of the relaxation of those emergency controls by the Committee of Public Safety, but the reign of terror was extended. You may be asking yourself, what is the reign of terror? Well, it's funny you ask, because we're going to go over it. This is the most notorious, infamous event of the French Revolution. You thought it was crazy already, you ain't seen nothing yet. So during the Reign of Terror, the Committee of Public Safety starts passing different laws. And the first one we're talking about is the Law of Suspects. Alleged enemies of the revolution were brought before a revolutionary tribunal that was created basically just to hear cases of treason. And it was instituted as an alternative to the lynch law of the September massacre. So it was supposed to be, fairer. But the bottom line is, if you went before this tribunal, the chances are you were going to be found guilty, no question about it. So you have a political cartoon here that illustrates the Law of Suspects, and Robespierre here is searching for potential enemies of the revolution, sifting through. And kind of a scary thing. Queen Marie Antoinette was executed later in that year. She was a suspect. And about 400,000 people, or I'm sorry, wrong math there. 40,000 people throughout France were executed or died in prison, many by the guillotine. So if you remember, like the September massacres, there was only about 1,000. Here we have 40,000 people. I mean, I can't even grasp that mentally, seriously. And you have a political cartoon here, basically the guillotine running nuts all over France. So make sure I'm going to make this part of the quiz as well. But the executions, seriously, they became a spectator sport, very, very disgusting. And the terror became a political weapon. It wasn't really directed at any class in particular. Some examples of this: 8% were nobles, 14% bourgeoisie, mainly from the rebellious southern cities who didn't like listening to France all the time. 6% was clergy, and this might surprise you, but 70% were the peasants and the laboring classes. Most of the deaths occurred in places of open revolt against the convention and against the revolution, such as the Vendée and western France. So eventually another 300,000 were in prison. And this is where people start calling the guillotine the national razor. All right, again, here it is. It's dreadful, but necessarily. Just these are the heads that are rolling, and it's just very disturbing. This is what the general will did. It made people think that this was necessary. Okay, so we're going to end there. That's where we're going to pick up. Be prepared for a quiz, and thanks for playing the game. You guys are great. Bye-bye.